This is Radical Love Live, an ongoing series of podcasts and special events where we explore faith outside the boxes. Hosted by Mark Dilcom and Kelly Wilson.
Hey, Kelly. Hey, Mark. How are you?
I am freaking awesome as always.
Well, you're looking awesome. You're
Thank you.
very well styled.
Yeah, right. My hair is, I'm growing it out a little bit. I'm looking for a look because I realized one thing.
Yeah.
My hair is quickly turning white. Like it's going.
Yeah.
And I figured, well, all right, I'm going to make it fabulous. Then I'm going to grow it out because I got a lot of it. Because one of the advantages of hair turning gray, it gets a little thicker, a little coarser. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to rock this dude.
Are we going to be able to call you a silver fox?
Indeed, I'm going to be a silver fox.
I love it. I love it. I am really excited about our conversation that we're going to have today.
Yeah, we have an awesome guest who's returning, right?
That's right. We have our friend Jay Bakker is with us today. Jay is a pastor, an author, and a speaker. He's the pastor of Revolution Church, which is currently based in Seattle, but you can experience the talks with Revolution Church online on Facebook and YouTube. And you may also know some of Jay's family members. Jay is the son of Jim Bakker and Tammy Faye Messner, who you may remember from television, and also some recent documentaries and movies about Jay's mom, who was a fantastic lady.
Amazing lady.
Yep. Yeah. So welcome, Jay.
Thank
Great
you.
to see you today.
Great to be back, guys.
Hey, Jay.
Hey.
So happy to see you.
Thank you.
So first off, Jay, let's talk about that awesome set you have behind you. I was watching some of your stuff on YouTube. I was like, that rocks. We need to have a set like that. I just wanted to get that out there.
And I'll say,
so
you know,
that
he's got books. He's got explicit words in the background as well.
Yeah, no, over there. I don't know if you can still see it.
Over there. I saw it, Jay.
Yeah, sorry, you guys are going to have to blur that out. It's not spelt right. It's not spelt right. It's the British spelling. This is my house.
No, I
found this apartment and I saw this bookcase and I was like, oh yeah, it's awesome, you know? So I had a little,
it totally fits you. And I love what you're doing. The work that you do, as Kelly was just saying, you're putting it out there and you're proving the future of the church is not tied to a physical building. It does not need to be brick and mortar. In fact, there's probably a lot of reasons why it shouldn't be brick and mortar. So congratulations on what you're doing with your house church and also teaching some people, which we're going to talk about. Right. So.
Yeah, Jay called me out this morning. I don't know if he realized that he did that, but I was listening to you on your most recent talk about Galatians on the way over here. And the other day I was on one of the social media platforms, as Threads or Instagram or something. And there's an influencer there who's deconstructed and is, often critiques the, evangelical Christianity or Christianity in general. And she gets a lot of flack from mostly like white Christian men who just, feel a need to correct her.
Of course.
And I said to her, I was like,
you don't get this.
And I just wanted to be encouraging. So I was like, you know what? Everything needs to be tested. Everything needs to be challenged. If it can't stand up to scrutiny, burn it down. Put a torch to it. And I was listening to Jay this morning, and he was talking about progressives who use language like that.
Oh, I use that language too. Do you mean I just got called out by Jay too, and I don't know it?
Even metaphorically, if we're using the tools that our enemies are using, it's very easy to start falling into that trap of like, we're the good guys, they're the bad guys. So anyway, I had to repent on my way over here for even metaphorically talking about putting the torch to some of those old dogmas.
Well, it's the idea of like how many people I've met at MCC whose churches were actually burnt down. And, I went when I was a teenager, the church I went to was, majority of it was Black, and talking to them about their history of churches being burnt down. And, to me, I think we've got to seek peace. And, I don't like want to live, like, I don't want Mark Driscoll to be famous and all that stuff, but I don't want him to be burnt down. Like, I mean, he has the right to say what he wants to say. And we have the right to disagree, and hopefully we can disagree well. Um, but when we, like, there's what was it Nietzsche said? Nietzsche said, when you're fighting monsters, be careful of becoming a monster.
Right,
Oh,
right.
so
And
true.
so I've seen
So true.
the past, gosh, 15, 20 years, I've seen the progressive movement that, which was like, which just saved my life, but I've seen it become
Mm.
more and more like the evangelical movement and using the same language and things like canceling and stuff like that, and turn into what more of what evangelicals are like. They're just returning the same stuff, and it's just a lot of angry. I mean, sometimes like when we talk, like I always was interested in deconstruction, but for me, deconstruction is just reading scholarship, reading good scholarship and realizing, oh, what I was taught growing up isn't true. But a lot of times deconstruction
Hmm.
becomes like, oh, they're jerks. And, oh, I hate them. And they're so bad. And oh my God, can you believe that guy? Can you, and it's like, and we just turn into like, we're just returning the favor. The same things they said about us, we're saying about them. And what it's doing is it's not bringing us together. It's not allowing us to have a conversation. It's not bringing hope. What it's doing is just continuing the divide. It's continuing a circle. So when we just fight with each other all the time, we just have this circle, and they think they're good and we think we're good, and we just continue this fight. And I feel like if the church is going to exist in 30 or 40 years, um, we have to start looking at unity through diversity. And we have to not just expect them to be tolerant, but we also have to learn to be tolerant. You know, people, it's so funny. Like a lot of my really like justice warrior friends, they're really into like the Beatitudes, but like they always forget when it gets to the part about loving your enemy and being
Yep.
kind to
Hmm.
them.
It's hard.
And then, everybody's like, well, I can't, yesterday I had a conversation with a theologian, and, and they were like talking about like, it was like a guy holding the sign. It was like, we can disagree and, still be friends or something. Like, what white guys say after arguing gays don't have the right to exist, And so I was on there and I was like, is this really helping? Is this really adding to the conversation, or is it just reinforcing a stereotype? And of course, that went over like a lead balloon. Um,
Hmm.
and that's tough because I don't feel like I have any place where I really fit in anymore, because I want to be a peacemaker and because I've taken that little end of the Beatitudes, right? Because you have to admit it. Like when I was growing up, evangelicals, like my mom had a prison ministry, women's prison ministry. The church that I was doing revolution at for a long time, which was homeless, working with the homeless and feeding the homeless, they were evangelicals. It's like we forget, like, oh, they are doing some good things, you know,
Hmm.
but
This is
instead
true.
we get so focused on like who they're against and their doctrine, we're like, well, they're following the Beatitudes. So maybe we should be having conversations with them. Like maybe we should go feed the homeless together. And maybe that will give us a chance to have these tough conversations. And then people say, well, I don't want to argue with someone who disagrees with me or doesn't recognize my humanity. And I go, I understand that. And often it takes a lot of therapy to get to that place. And God knows I've had it.
Hmm.
I've had everything. I've had electric shock therapy. I've had psychoanalysis. I've had, you name it, I've tried it. Um, but also you have to think about like, what if Dr. King or Gandhi or John Hume, when he came into the troubles, what if he had done that and said, I'm not going to recognize the other? There would be no peace in Ireland. They wouldn't have the Good Friday Agreement. Dr. King
Yes.
would not exist. I mean, Dr. King would sit with people who would say, call him Dr. Coon, and
Yeah.
have to, and still, and she'll show them respect and love and dignity. So I think we just have to reframe how we work with others, because I just feel like the progressive movement is becoming all about being against the conservative movement now. So to me, it's like, well, now we're known for what we don't agree with. And that was what we were leaving the other church for, because they were all about like, we don't love the gays or we don't want them at our church. We love them, but we want them to change. And, we want you to not have sex before marriage. And we want you to, so we're like, oh, predestinate, whatever, you go like, oh,
Hmm.
they just,
Hmm.
that's what they're known for. And now for me, like, on the Revolution Instagram, I follow all these like ex-Christian or former Christian or former evangelical, and I just watch, and it's just anger, meanness, you know, and funny things. They put up funny memes, but after a while, you got to question like, what's the spirit behind this?
Yeah.
And is this getting conversation going, or is it just stopping the conversation from happening? And now we're just all like radio hosts of like conservative, and it also makes me feel like we don't believe God. Like we more believe our in our dogma, in our presidents and in our things like this. Like our faith is really in world leaders and not like, I mean, I think that God is the ground of being, like Paul Tillich. So it's really hard for me to
Yep.
say, well, I believe in God because he's a man in the sky or anything like that.
Mhm.
But it's, it's still like, where does my faith lay? And my faith lays in loving my neighbor as myself, loving my enemy
Mhm.
and loving God as I understand God with all my heart. And I think loving those people is how I show that. So I can't write those people off. And I guess that's what I learned growing up, is seeing my parents being scapegoated by the left because my parents were too kooky, and the right because my parents were too progressive.
Mhm.
Sorry, that was a mouthful, guys.
Which is
No.
wild. I often have to be reminded that back in the 80s that your folks were more at the progressive end, and
Yeah.
but it was the
No one remembers that, but yeah, they were, doing shows on penis implants and, interviewing, my friend Steve, who has had AIDS. And he just
Yes.
recently passed away.
Right.
But he became like a father figure to me. But having Steve, who was an openly gay MCC pastor with AIDS, and doing
Mhm.
things like that, my parents never took political, they just, I mean, like I met JJ Walker because he was on the PTL show. I mean, I met, all these different people. So we were from the conversation we had earlier, but yeah, so it's like, but it's funny. It's just funny to see how we still just have this tendency to scapegoat. And I do too. Like my first thought is when I see like someone saying something horrible, it's like, I want to just reach out and love that person. Like I want to become like,
Mhm.
I want to be like Die Hard. I want to be like, he's a loose
Yeah.
cannon, but he's the
Yeah.
best
Yeah.
damn cop we have. Listen here, buddy. But, I have to think of Dr. King. I have to think of Gandhi. I have to think of Jesus. I have to think of Paul. And I think that's another problem, is the progressives sometimes don't embrace the Apostle Paul because of like forgeries of, the pastoral epistles are all forgeries that were written to make Paul seem more conservative. And even parts
Like
of
all the ones that have very strong
First Timothy, Second
ethics
Timothy,
about
and
what
Titus.
women should be doing, and yeah.
Right.
Those aren't Paul. They're most scholars call them reactionary Paul. Even conservative scholars and Catholic scholars that recognize that, they'll always say, well, there's a reason. Well, that was a way we used to write back then. I'm like, oh, so you pretend to be a dead guy, write into another dead guy, and then do the opposite of what that guy taught, and that was respectable. So we also have to look at things
It
like
was
that.
Billy
because-
Shears. That's right. That's a very dated joke.
because Paul teaches us about grace.
Mhm.
Paul
Yes.
takes grace to the next level. And the whole
Yes.
book of Galatians is about trying to bring a community that's divided over religion, Christian religion. And he's trying to rebuke them, love them, prove that he's worthy of being a pastor or whatever, and then also show them grace and try to warn them, like, you guys got to stop fighting each other or you're going to destroy each other. You can respect each other's differences, but you can't force those on each other or you're going to destroy each other. And I think that's why, we see a lot of people like, well, I just read the red letters. I don't like Paul. And I think that's why we also see a lack of grace in like the community.
So, Jay, we were just in a conversation for another episode, and I said exactly what you mentioned, that if we could just live by Jesus's teaching through and I'd quoted the
red letters.
The red letters.
Sorry, guys.
No,
We're all over each other. It's all meant to be. It's all.
And you bring it home like that. It's like, no, there is actually more. And I guess the reason why I do that is because, I do have a bias towards how the language has been, corrupted, changed, co-opted, lost in translations from Aramaic to to Greek to English, and then the multiple translations of the Bible itself that are out there in this world, and just like, oh my God, what is truth?
Yeah, yeah.
So,
No, I get
so
it.
you though, and watching what you do, I was watching one of your podcasts there on,
Yeah.
sure, whatever that thing is
We
that you do
started
on
it before
YouTube.
there were podcasts.
Yes, exactly.
We used
Right.
to put it on a
Dude,
cassette and then transfer it to a CD and then put it online because I had a guy who was just a computer nerd. And I was like, he's like, we're going to put this online. I'm like, dude, that's not going anywhere. But if you want
Did
to
it
do
take
it,
like
do it.
6 hours over
Yeah.
dial up?
yeah, dude.
Yeah.
Yep. Oh, wow. And see what you're doing now is absolutely incredible, because the way you were breaking down Galatians, it immediately I'm thinking people need to tune into you and watch this, because even if you're not a Christian, just outside of that, you are teaching biblical perspective, and that is so needed. It is, it's not the same as Bible study. And unfortunately, I think myself included, I have made that mistake. It's like, oh, well, you just do Bible study. No, all that means is you're just reading scripture and maybe sharing a little bit about it. You actually are taking it's showing a perspective in a holistic way and putting it into context, relational context, that is so important to the time itself and how this person would have done that and expressed themselves. And job well done.
Oh, thank you. Well, Dan, you guys shouldn't see this guy, Dan McClellan. He's a scholar and he's like, he always shows like a video and he's like, and they say a claim and he's like, okay, let's see what you have to say, and he's really big on YouTube. And,
Mhm.
I've reached out to him some and he's, said, oh, here's some great books to read and things like that. Like, so I reach out to scholars because I'm an
Mm,
autodidact. I'm all self-taught. So I
yeah,
reach
you
out
are.
and I
Yeah.
read scholarship. I mean, the book on Galatians that I've been reading right now is like 5 times the size of the Bible. And that's on
Uh-huh.
a 6-chapter book of the Bible. And
Yeah.
it goes deep, deep, deep. And also my best friend's a philosopher. So I
Mm.
read a lot of philosophy and and a lot of scholarship. And I've almost taken theology out of it because I think philosophy and scholarship come together as kind of a theology. And so,
Absolutely.
yeah. And then reading like Dr. King or like John Hume, and people like that who also really inspire me. And then when you really get into with the meat of this stuff, you go, oh, this is where, Dr. King got it. And so I would even say that I'm a Paulinian Christian. Like I'm very Paulinian,
Mm.
and
Mhm.
so I'm trying to also help bring Paul back into the church because I think we would love each other a lot more if we understood it. And if we were honest about like there's there's mistakes in the Bible, there's forgeries in the Bible, and we have to like look at that and we have to deal with that.
Yeah, well, that's not the most popular thing to say, because with biblical inerrancy wafting through so many believers' minds, that what's there is the absolute truth.
Well, have you met my dad?
I
No.
can tell you, my dad's a big fan
It's of
of
Jay's
his
dad.
dad.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yes,
so I
yes,
mean,
yes.
you get it,
Mm.
like, and that's cost us a lot. I mean, my dad's really sick right now. He's been having strokes. I don't know how
Oh,
long he's fit for this world,
sorry to
and
hear that.
it's been really difficult to because I don't watch his show. I keep all that out of it because I want him to be
Yeah.
dad. But we automatically
Yep.
come to talking about theology somehow. It always comes up because
Mhm.
it's common ground for
Yeah.
the both of us.
So can we jump to something that you just said? So in our conversation we had with you 3 years ago, you kind of blew me away, because in talking about your relationship with your father, and how much you loved him, and of course with your children, you still make sure that he sees them. Like there's no disconnect, even though you may not agree with what he does. But the love of the family is greater than egos or opinions on things. Which I was like, wow, there's a lesson in there for me in the capacity. So my point in bringing this up though is your the work you do, and you say that you two can't help but have this conversation. Does he understand the work that you do, and does he appreciate what you do?
He used to appreciate it more.
Yeah.
We had about 3 years where we didn't talk after his first stroke,
Mm,
probably right after we did that interview.
Wow.
And
Okay.
we just recently kind of reconciled, not even really reconciled, just started talking again. I don't even, we had a really come to Jesus talk one day though on the phone, and it was pretty heavy, but luckily I'd
Yeah.
taken about a year of psychoanalysis and I was ready for it. But
Mm.
um, I don't know. Like the last time I talked to him, he said, "I think maybe I told you too much about grace, and all this stuff." And so,
Mm.
and if he's thinking about death, and he's like, I just want you to be in heaven, And I'm like, he doesn't like the
Mm.
fact that I don't believe in hell. That bothers him a little bit, and
Mhm.
he thinks I'm changing the Bible to fit my, to tickle ears. I'm like, Dad, I'm not tickling ears. I don't even know if I'll be able to pay my rent this month, honestly. So it's like, um, it's tough, and I just have to. I told him, I said, well, Dad, I said, if I get to heaven, I don't know how this comes. If I get to heaven and they go, oh, we don't know, you're too much grace. I'm like, well, I guess I took all that stuff that Jesus and Paul said too literally. And then the fact that my parents kept forgiving all these people like Jerry Falwell and all these people who hurt them in their life, I guess I just took that too literally. So I'm sorry. And au revoir,
Hmm.
and
Mm.
he kind of, I think that made a little, he laughed, and I think that made sense to him. Like, oh, I'm like, Dad, like, you don't realize, like, in the 80s, this is what you guys taught me. Like, when you were in prison, this is the type of love you
Mm.
and Mom taught me to have for other people.
Hmm.
So, because my dad
Mm.
wasn't a political evangelical back then, he is now, but that wasn't
Yeah.
his thing back then. So, and I think in some ways it bothers him because he knows I'm probably better at scholarship, biblical scholarship than him. And then I know probably a little bit more than he does. And I think that's hard for dads to deal with, because I'm reading all the time. I mean, I have to.
Hmm.
I didn't, I've gone to seminary just to sit in classes and take them for fun, but it's like I didn't
Yeah.
get a degree or anything. So I have to continue to study. And I'm like, I'll read Tillich or Hegel or, and that's just almost impossible. Or I'll have to read a book about Hegel, and reading these books and then going on a really deep dive is, I think, important. And I think that's, to me, is what real deconstruction is. Deconstruction isn't saying like, well, they were mean to me, so we're going to just be mean back to them, or that we're going to leave. And so I'm not
Agreed.
going to believe this anymore. For me, I always talk to people like that and go like, hey, no, like, study study the history. Look at the Greek, look at the Hebrew, look at the scholarship behind these books. And when you see them in context, you'll realize like the things you're feeling are correct.
Hmm.
That to me is deconstruction. To me, I always thought my whole life was deconstruction, you know, because it's just finding out what the deeper truth is and what the actual truth is and what the customs were at the time. And, Freud wasn't around. We didn't have normal ideas of sexuality. We didn't have, so like all that stuff there is like, well, I don't like the
This is true.
language. Well, the word homosexual wasn't even in the Bible until a certain amount of time.
1946, there's
Yeah.
a
And if you
documentary
look,
about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
if you
Go
take
watch the documentary,
like
folks.
Paul
Yep.
and all these guys in context, you're going like, okay, 2000 years ago, Middle Eastern guy who was a probably a Pharisee, and these folks and the culture they're in, yeah, they might not agree with you. I could say you could probably go to the same area where he is right now and realize that most of the folks in that community would probably be a little bit put off by your belief system. So the thing is we've got to let people be people. We got to let Paul be Paul. We got to let Jesus be Jesus. We got to let these people be products of their time. And the good news is when you go, oh, there are forgeries, it just makes the news better. When you look deeper into it, to me, it gets better. It gets more like love. Love never gives up. It never loses faith. Is always hopeful. Endures through every circumstance. When you hear stuff like that, you start to go like, I just can't understand why we so strongly ignore. Jesus said, loving your enemies. And one of the things about my mom, for a minute, Tammy Faye, it was her
Mhm.
birthday yesterday. And
Mm.
yeah, my kids were just really great. My kids are 8 and 6, and they put I have a big portrait painted of her, and they put up all the stuffed animals, and they threw a little party for my
Mm.
mom, and I started crying. And
Oh,
Oh,
that's
wow.
so sweet.
my
Oh, wow.
8-year-old son was like, Milo was like, Dad, it's okay to cry, and it was just, ugh, ugh,
You make me cry.
oh,
Yeah. Poor
well,
God.
I didn't stop crying when he said, I was like,
Yeah.
no, I've
Oh, my
got really
God.
sweet kids. And
Sounds like you do.
yeah,
Yes.
they're amazing and they're my life. And that's part of the reason why I have to move around the world and do these things. I want to be with my kids, because God told me to go to Seattle and set people free from Mars Hill. No, no. You
That's not what happened.
kids' school, kids' mom had, my ex-wife had family here. Here I am.
And there you are.
Yeah.
God love you, man.
So one of the things about my mom is why is Elton John flew me out to London to see the play that he and his partner David put together, and
Yes.
Keir
Yeah.
from Scissor
Yeah.
Sisters did about my mom, and it's coming to Broadway.
Wait a minute. Stop. So I didn't know that. So Jake Shears is behind that in the music of
Yeah,
this?
he's
Oh,
so
I'm a
I
huge
said,
fan.
Jake,
Huge fan
okay,
of Jake
so
Shears, the Scissor
well,
Sisters.
this will make you very happy. That's who I spent most of my time with in London.
Oh my
And
God.
he is the most down to earth, normal,
Oh.
loving, compassionate human being I've ever met. His mom was there. I hung out with him and his mom. His mom kept an eye
Wow.
on me the whole time during the show to make sure I was okay. They just
Wow.
loved me. I felt like I had known Jake for years, and you would never have guessed that this is a rock star or now an actor, like a famous, like Broadway.
Yeah.
You would never get. He was just such a human being, such a great
Mm.
human being, and I really love him. And he contacts me every now and then, and we talk and chat. He's sweet, sweet man. The reason they've done like a play about my mom, a movie that won an Oscar about my mom, and I've just finished doing a documentary with a 4-part documentary with Vice, and
that's right. You were out at Sundance for that.
yeah,
right?
we were.
Yep.
Okay, so we got to talk about that before we leave. So
we
keep
will.
telling about the reason.
Yeah.
Yep.
But the reason isn't because, oh, well, she's a Christian and she's funny and she wears all that makeup. It's because what Jesus said to the disciples at the end of the Last Supper, he goes, hey, I want to give you guys a new commandment, which wasn't new at all. So I would be like, what? Because he's like, I want you to love each other. And he goes, no, I really want you to love each other because the world will know that you belong to me for your love for one another. And so the reason these plays are made about my mother is because she truly loved people, because she could be comfortable in a room full of Baptists or a room full of drag queens. And we need more people like that. And that's why I am called to try to be a peacemaker and try to come in and say, we got to do this and we got to heal these wounds, or we're, as Paul said in Galatians, if we continue to bite and devour one another, we will be consumed by one another and we will be destroyed.
One thing that we keep seeing right now is that there are people, and it's not just in this country, I think it's in other countries as well, but who feel like their way of expressing their love for each other is to legislate each other.
Yeah.
That it's, like, I'm going to legislate you into heaven.
Yeah.
Is there a way that we can kind of get out of each other's way politically while we're still, because
that's why I would really,
like, those guys believe that and those guys believe that, but
I would
in
really
the public space,
recommend reading John Hume's book, A New Ireland, because he talks about that. He's like, we had to bring Protestants and Catholics together, and how did we do that? And it was unity through diversity. And it was basically the fact, like, no one wins, but no one loses. There's compromise involved. And for some reason, Christians don't like that word at all. But we say, like, hey, listen, Mark Driscoll or John Piper or whoever, I don't know who anybody is anymore. I don't even feel like I live within that Christian world anymore. But whoever is saying mean stuff now, we're like, listen, we respect your right to say these things and to believe those ways, but we don't respect legislation. So there's nonviolence reaction. There's things like this, but there's also having tough conversations. But scapegoating and starting whole podcasts about why we think they're idiots is not going to change that. So we're going to, and what we also have to do is we have to have patience. Another thing is we often want it to happen overnight. So rather than taking the time, we just jump to judgment, because judgment's a little bit easier than being like, I'm going to be patient and work towards this. But if we could get the government to say, like, hey, you got to get the hell out of religion. You can't, you got to stay away. We can't legislate anybody to Jesus. And we've put religion over humanity, or what was it? I have wrote, I took notes here, territory, like that. We'll choose territory over people, and not for Christians, it's theology or dogma over people. And we've got to embrace
Hmm.
humanity. And I think we believe where Paul said there's neither male nor female, nor Jew nor Gentile, slave or free. I think we have to say there's neither Christian or atheist, you know, and we need to live in a world where, because the government's job should be bettering our lives, giving us health care, making sure there's roads that are safe to drive on, that our kids can go to school, that we can have a livable wage, we can pay our taxes. Um, you know, so that's the thing, is like getting to a point where we can, and this is not this is like maybe a 30-40 year project. If you really wanted to start working, it took John Hume 30 years to see peace in Ireland, in Northern Ireland. So it takes time, but we've got to have people who are willing to make the sacrifice and make the movements towards that. People who are willing to say, like, I'm not going to attack my enemy. I'm going to love my enemy, and I'm going to respect their beliefs, even though they're different. It's so weird how we're really good at like religious talks, like, oh, I had wow with a Jew and a Muslim and stuff like that, but don't put me in the room with a
Hmm.
neo-Calvinist, you know. Um, and some of those folks of those other religions believe the same thing that the neo-Calvinist believes, you know,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
but we're just not tolerant because they're doing it in the name of Jesus. And I think we have to find common ground. And I think we'd have to lay our faith aside, is what, we do too. The progressives do too, because we're like, you guys, you conservatives need to get out of religion, but we're in there too. We all just need to step back and say, how do we let the people live? How do we, um, allow this country to improve the way of everyone's life? You know, Straight, gay, conservative, Democrat, whatever. How do we do that? Unfortunately, I don't think any of our politicians are on that rate, but we have to think about different politicians. We have to think about other
Hmm.
parties. Um, but I think the idea of conquest undermines, everything, when it's this us versus them, and it just drives us further apart when we're like,
Agreed.
we got to win.
Agreed. This us, well, as you know, Jay, you feel it in your heart. You feel it. I have no doubt. There is no us versus them. There is no
Yeah.
other. It's a we. We're all deeply interconnected. There
Hmm.
is that oneness. And, not even to get woo woo. It's just the reality of the situation. But yet we live so well, and that's unfortunately part of the human condition is to other. We've been doing this for our many, many, many centuries and millennia, right? And we just see it manifested in so many ways today because of, technology has allowed us to other in ways that we never thought possible. So,
Well,
uh,
and capitalism, capitalism
there's that.
continues to
Yep.
to push us to divide us. And if you look at politics, how these politicians divide us, they go like, well, one group likes gays and one group doesn't. And
Hmm.
so, next thing you know, well, I love Joe Biden because he did something for the group that I really love. But he's also like helping bombs and wars all over the country. You know what I mean? It's like you
Hmm.
can't, like, now we're becoming one issue voters. Now we're turning our eye towards like, oh, well, no, we don't ever, like, we're not looking at ourselves. And that's
Agreed.
the problem, is we've got to self-examine and take a very hard, honest look at who we are and what we believe and where the contradiction is. And some contradictions we have to live with. That's just part of life. And sometimes
Hmm.
contradictions are higher than truth. But there's a lot of contradictions that just don't work for us. And, we're scapegoating the other to feel better about ourselves, and also to avoid looking within the abyss that's within us, that lack that's within us, that capitalism somehow promises to fill. And capitalism
Hmm.
really makes money off of us arguing online, dealing with this kind of stuff. And then so you got
Yes.
conservatives say, well, we'll save you from abortion. And so now we're all doing these issues, and we're just being distracted because all the politicians have money in war. They all have money and all this stuff. There, there's very little difference between the two parties. But if you're gay, there's a big difference between the two parties, it seems, so we have to keep that in mind as well. But we all have to be honest with that. Like, are we one issue voters? Are we this or that? Like, what's going on here? And, and speak truth to each other. But it's hard, I mean, I feel like when we play into identity politics, we get into trouble, and we us and them, or we put one group above another group, or then we get into the hierarchy of suffering. Well, I've suffered more, so I have the right to say this and you don't. Um, it's really interesting because when I have conversations under the Revolution Instagram, people don't necessarily know who I am or know and sometimes they don't know who I am even when I'm on my Instagram, my Jay Bakker.
Hmm.
um, but they don't know my
Right.
history. They don't know my work. They don't know what I've done with, LGBTQ rights and my work with Soul Force and all these different things. And
Yep.
so it's really funny when you try to bring up this peace stuff and they start throwing all this other stuff at you. And it's just what it's shown me is that so many people aren't prepared to disagree well,
Hmm.
much less argue well,
Mm,
and if we're free
mm.
from conflict, usually what happens when you can't have conflict, you go to war. You start going to war and canceling each other. You have to be able to have conflict in life. And in capitalism, it said, no, you don't need conflict. You need a new car. You don't need conflict. You need 100 billion channels. Now we're adding commercials. So pay a little bit more. You don't need, you know, you need this, you need Joe Biden. No, you
Hmm.
need Donald Trump. They'll save the day. And
Yeah.
that's just not, I mean, the world is, it feels like the world is burning. Every day I wake up and I feel like the world is burning. And so when I reach out to these young folks and evangelical, like progressives, and like, hey, can we think differently? It's so hard. Like, I've been asked to leave conversations and said, you're
Hmm.
not safe, or you shouldn't be here, and I'm going like, but I'm able to give you a perspective that you might not have had because I've been on the other side, because someone was arguing satire with me, and I was like, well, I understand satire, but I've also had satire aimed towards my family as a child. And I know how that felt, that it didn't warm me up or change my mind.
Hmm.
Um, so I think there's room for satire. I mean, I love satire. I love Ricky Gervais. I think he's hilarious, but I think these are tough things that we have to ask ourselves. Are we just throwing fuel on fire and making more people angry? And why, like, I come in and I'm automatically judged because he's like, well, he's not going along with what we're saying. He's a white heterosexual male, so he must be a bad guy. And I'm like, guys, I'm like super snowflake. I'm like, I'm special. I have never voted for a Republican in my life. And people are like, why are you so hard on the Democratic Party? Why are you so hard on the Democrats? Why are you so hard on the left? I'm like, because I always thought that that's where our hope lied. And now it realizes that
Mm,
it's our hope lies in humanity. Our hope doesn't lie in a party. Our hope doesn't lie even in Christianity. Our hope lies
Hmm.
within us being able to see each other as humans and finding unity through diversity and allowing each other to live and let live, and realizing that, hey, the government has got to make things right for everybody. Like, it's got to make it a safe place for all people, and not just Democrats and not just conservatives. But how do we,
Hmm.
but we're not, like, if we keep calling people who are burning books Nazis or banning books Nazis and things like that, I'm like, I don't like it either. And that's my first very knee jerk reaction as well. But take a few minutes and
mm.
step back. And I always think, like, well, what would my mom say? Or what would Dr. King say? Because Jesus would usually just ask a crazy question, what would Jesus say? The book of I don't know what Jesus would say. But I know what Paul, and I know I feel like I've gotten inside the Apostle Paul's head a little bit, and I feel like I've gotten in some other, Paul Tillich is pretty good. I love
Oh,
Dr.
yes.
King. I mean, Dr. King was his most unpopular when he was assassinated because he was doing the poor people's campaign.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So, these type of ideas are not popular. Yeah. If I wanted, and it drives me crazy because there's times where I'd be like, I was very popular in the early 2000s and I had books and I did all this stuff. You know, and now this message just seems to be a message that's not welcomed anymore. And I miss the emergent church. I miss being with the community. I miss having people around, even though it
Hmm.
seems like now, like most Christians it's every man for themselves too, as
Yeah.
well. And like, we're not having conversations with each other who we even love. So it's, to me, I feel like a voice like screaming on the top of a hill, where like I'm trying to ring a bell and being like, you guys, we got to start practicing humanity, and this doesn't happen overnight. So it's just the little things. And so that's why I confront somebody who's puts up a meme. But usually I will say this, if I am confronting you, it's usually because I see something really positive in you and I believe in you. And if someone says, well, Jay Bakker said this to me, it's usually because I think this person is better than this, or this person could do so
hmm
much more. And we've got a lot of work to do. But I'm just not the person that people want to hear that from. So it's tough.
Oh,
Well,
I'm not
we're
going to
trying to
disagree.
get.
I'm not going to let you in that way. I'm sorry, because
I
they
don't know,
just
I'm
don't know.
finished.
Yeah.
We gotta get your word out there.
Yeah.
But I do understand people don't
I'm tired,
want
guys.
to.
I really am tired. It's tough.
Yeah,
work.
People
but
don't
dude,
want
you got
to.
to
Yeah.
keep doing it, because you're right. Maybe it feels really difficult, but yet the breakthrough is coming. I'm confident that I have hope. I have faith in what you are doing. We all need to be doing. So, Kelly, you were going to say something. I'm
But
sorry.
I
I
was just
stepped on
saying,
you.
people don't want to get out of that emotional, the emotional knee-jerk reactions,
That's
the
correct.
connection to
Yeah.
I'm in a tribe that is allied against this other tribe, and we all have certain rules. And
Yep.
when I go online, it's hard for me not to get into the temptation of that. I see something somebody says, and I want to be like, "Wow, you're so wrong," or whatever. But you think about all the uncommitted voters in this recent primary.
Yeah.
That so if somebody's
Absolutely.
named uncommitted
Yeah.
got into the campaign, they do pretty well. But there are people
Right.
who are definitely anti-Trump, but they also look at Biden and go, he's doing a lot of the same stuff, or he's doing a lot of other stuff that I don't like. We really need to get out of this
Oh,
binary and do something different.
yes, we are victims of the binary. That's
And
for sure.
We're totally
and
binary thinking
Oh,
is good and bad and all this stuff. It just the no room for nuance and
nuance. What's that?
yeah. I mean, it's really tough,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I feel like when I go to Northern Ireland a lot, and when I'm in Europe, I feel like they have a little bit more room for that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
they have figured this out, or at least they're better at demonstrating it. It's partly because of their cultures
And hearing some
as
of
well.
them say stuff like, well, if Trump wins, at least there'll be less wars all over the world. But I'm like, yeah, but then there's going to be wars within the country. You know what I mean? I'm like choose your
Yes, but you're also
war. It's like
choose your war.
that's how
Yeah.
divided we are.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so yeah,
It is. It is. So, Jay, we've got a few minutes left, and one thing that you mentioned, was circle back to it. Let's talk about that documentary.
yeah.
Let's do it.
Well,
So,
the idea originally came from me and Helen Rollins and Peter Rollins.
oh wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
we were all like, hey, let's make an hour-long documentary with
Mhm.
philosophers and psychoanalysts talking about how your mom was able to walk between these two worlds and bring people
Oh,
together.
that's
That's
great.
brilliant.
So
Yeah.
I know, but that unfortunately, that's not the documentary that's being made. But let me finish. Let me finish. Um, so we took it.
Best laid plans.
So they took it. They were shopping things to Vice
Yeah.
Media, which unfortunately now seems to be over, almost over.
Yeah.
But they
Oh,
were,
yeah.
and they go, "Oh, we love this idea." I'm like, "Well, we got Jay Bakker part of it, and blah blah blah." And at the time, my dad said he would do it, and then it changed his mind.
Mhm.
But they said we want to do a 4-hour thing on this. We want to go deep. We want to tell the whole story.
Yeah.
And so what's interesting is that now I think we're kind of telling a story that most people might not know, and they think they know. And it's really funny because there was one of the first reviews that came out from somebody who saw just 2 episodes. It was the half of it.
Mhm.
Didn't mention that they only saw half of it, and then made stuff
Mhm.
up from things that they had heard or what they had read on Wikipedia. And we actually had to contact them and say, this is not in the film. This actually never happened. What you're saying, you're getting this confused with something else. And so it kind of made me realize there's a reason for this documentary. Dana,
Mhm.
who's directing the film, he directed the Murder Ball documentary, which is really great if you haven't seen it.
Mm.
And so, yeah, we got to go to Sundance and it was wild. I saw Pauly Shore on the street and I was like, Weasel, you know, and I did. I totally was just like the 90s. That's I'm generation. Um, but yeah, we got to, go there, talk about the film and promote the film. And I'm excited for people to see it because I think it also does exactly what we're talking about is this kind of scapegoat of each
Mm,
other, this cancel kind of
mhm,
cancel culture that really is just not biblical. If you follow Jesus or Christianity, cancel culture, canceling anyone is not an option. You know,
Mhm.
Paul said, if you think you're too good to help redeem someone, you're only fooling yourself. You're really nobody. If you think you're too good to help, and he's talking about helping your enemy, believe it or not, restoring your enemy, because that's also in Galatians. That's the only book I've ever
Mhm.
read in the Bible, but it's pretty good. Um, I kid.
I like it. I always like that moment in Romans 2 where he's like, you know, they did these evil things and these evil things and these evil things, and then you turn the page and it's
he's
like,
like,
a you're no better.
yeah.
and you're no
I
better.
think Paul can be a little bit tense at times. I mean, he goes from telling each other to love each other to saying, like, I wish my enemies would castrate themselves. I get it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Not an easy dude.
That's right.
But well worth. It breaks my heart that progressives are missing out on grace because my whole life is built on grace. Grace
Mhm.
changed my
Mhm.
life. The best thing I've ever read on grace is a sermon from Paul Tillich called "You Are Accepted." Matter of fact, if people
Mm.
don't want, you could just Google it and it comes right up. If you don't want to read it and you want to listen to it, you can go to revolutionchurch.com and go to our YouTube. And we have Peter Rollins with his lovely Irish accent
Mhm.
reading the whole sermon because we did a whole study on it and then we had Pete read it. And so it's there. You can hear the audio version of it at Revolution. Um, and it's just this idea of just like you are accepted by something greater than yourself, and you don't have to believe more or believe less or even, you are accepted. And I just feel like we miss it out on it when we ignore Paul because people are like, well, Paul was, heterosexist or what is what's the word
Mhm.
everybody uses?
Like
Homophobic.
heteronormative or
He was
Homophobic.
homophobic,
Yeah.
and I'm going like,
Yeah.
he, Paul was talking about something different for one, and two, maybe he was 2,000 years ago in the Middle Eastern when he thought Jesus was coming back in 2 years, you know. Um, but the point is let's look deeper into it. And it is when Paul says there's no male or female, no Jew or Gentile, no slave or free. He's not just talking about salvation. He's talking about like this doesn't exist. So there's more liberation there than there is judgment. And then, like you said, when you
Oh,
get to
absolutely.
Romans 2, Paul says, "Oh, what horrible people I'm talking about. You are just as bad because you judge them." And
Mhm.
it's like, mind blowing. But yeah, so I think the film helps us look into this idea of this kind of when we make assumptions, when we don't look at nuances, when we, just go in there and judge people. And I think because it's called, it's about my mom called Better Angels.
Okay.
But you really see a lot. You learn a lot about my mom and dad from people who were there. And I helped book it. So I even booked people who worked for Jerry Falwell and were part of the people of the takeover and everything. So you get to hear
Wow.
both sides of the story. And I think it ended up being really powerful. I mean, there were moments that I was like, "Could you guys edit this out? I don't really like it," but but I didn't have that power. Everybody's like, "Oh, it's one sided because he's involved." And like literally, once we signed those contracts, all I could do is say, "I'll help you book. I'll give you the best interviews you can. I'll help you do research." But it's really at the end of the day, it was up to the director how it turned out, and I think it turned out beautifully. So, yeah,
Oh, wow.
Well, I
wild
definitely
life,
hope
man.
that it gets picked up soon, and we'll be able to see it.
Yeah, I'm hoping like a Netflix or Amazon or somebody like that. Not that I'm a huge fan of any of that, but I do hope they pick it up because I want people to see it.
Absolutely. Well,
Yep, we are at time.
unfortunately.
Yeah, I would love this
Oh
conversation
my
to
God.
keep on
Yeah, I feel
going.
like I could have
Uh,
like this is
Jay,
you
you
guys are
have to come
great.
back. I mean,
Appreciate you letting me
well,
chat.
back at you, brother, back at you. So you have to come back
I'd love to.
and let's pick up this conversation because I love the work you do.
Yeah.
Like you are undeterred in showing us that unconditional love is, I don't know, we could actually do this.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I
absolutely.
think it's a
Yeah.
mix between
Yeah.
like punk rock and Dr. King and my mom, there's all those things kind of just got into my heart, and I took it
Yeah.
really seriously.
Oh, God. Well, Godspeed to you, brother.
Yeah, keep up the good work. We will, we're big fans. We'll continue to amplify you.
Thanks, guys.
And it was just very, very good to
Great
talk
see
with
you,
you.
Jay. Thanks for listening to this episode of Radical Love Live, co-hosted by Mark Dilcom and Kelly Wilson. All rights reserved. You can find our podcast on Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, and other popular podcast platforms. Go to radicallovelive.com to learn more about us, watch recordings of our live events, and listen to our podcast. We also invite you to check out what Kelly and Mark are doing by going to our websites. Find Kelly at kellywilson.com and Mark at markdilcom.com. This is Radical Love Live, where we explore faith outside the boxes.